Washington Legacy Committee.
Hi, I'm Peggy Montez, a member of the Harold Washington Legacy Committee, here to invite you to attend a fantastic program that we will be having on Wednesday, October the 5th at the Apostolic Church of God at 64th and Dorchester, 10 o'clock until 3. And we intend to have wonderful speakers, as well as to inform you how you can play your part in helping to have a wonderful election on November 8th. We're asking everybody to come out to that event, as well as to remind your friends how important it is for us to be present, to vote, and make certain that we have a wonderful election. Remember 1983, come out and see.
Does the truth matter? Not to groups like Black Lives Matter. That's tragic for many reasons, not the least of which is that Black lives are being lost as a result. When it comes to the subject of American police, blacks, and the deadly use of force, here is what we know. A recent deadly force study by Washington State University researcher Lois James found that police officers were less likely to shoot unarmed black suspects than unarmed white or Hispanic ones in simulated threat scenarios. Harvard economics professor Roland Fryer analyzed more than 1,000 officer-involved shootings across the country. He concluded that there is zero evidence of racial bias in police shootings. In Houston, he found that blacks were 24% less likely than whites to be shot by officers, even though the suspects were armed or violent. Does the truth matter? An analysis of the Washington Post's police shooting database and of federal crime statistics reveals that fully 12% of all whites and Hispanics who die of homicide are killed by cops. By contrast, only 4% of black homicide victims are killed by cops. But isn't it a sign of bias that blacks make up 26% of police shooting victims, but only 13% of the national population? It is not, and common sense suggests why. Police shootings occur more frequently where officers confront armed or violently resisting suspects. Those suspects are disproportionately black. According to the most recent study by the Department of Justice, although blacks were only about 15% of the population in the 75 largest counties in the U.S., they were charged with 62% of all robberies, 57% of murders, and 45% of assaults. In New York City, blacks commit over 3/4 of all shootings, though they are only 23% of the city's population. Whites, by contrast, commit under 2% of all shootings in the city, though they are 34% of the population. New York's crime disparities are repeated in virtually every racially diverse city in America. The real problem facing inner-city black communities today is not the police, but criminals. In 2014, over 6,000 blacks were murdered, more than all white and Hispanic homicide victims combined. Who is killing them? Not the police and not white civilians, but other blacks. In fact, a police officer is 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a black male than an unarmed black male is to be killed by a police officer. If the police ended all use of lethal force tomorrow, it would have a negligible impact on the black death by homicide rate. In Chicago, through just the first 6.5 months of 2016, over 2,300 people were shot. That's a shooting an hour during some weekends. The vast majority of the victims were black. During the same period, the Chicago police shot 12 people, all armed and dangerous. That's 0.5% of all shootings. Does the truth matter? If it does, here's a truth worth pondering. There is no government agency more dedicated to the proposition that Black lives matter than the police. The proactive policing revolution that began in the mid-1990s has dramatically brought down the inner-city murder rate and saved tens of thousands of black lives. Unfortunately, that crime decline is now in jeopardy. As I write in my book, The War on Cops, Police officers are backing off of proactive policing in black neighborhoods thanks to the false narrative that police officers are infected with homicidal bias. As a result, violent crime is going up. In cities with large black populations, homicides in 2015 rose anywhere from 54% in Washington, D.C. to 90% in Cleveland. Overall, in the nation's 56 largest cities, homicides in 2015 rose 17%, a nearly unprecedented one-year spike. Many law-abiding residents of high-crime areas beg the police to maintain order, precisely the type of policing that the ACLU, progressive politicians, and the Obama Justice Department denounce as racist. This is tragic because when the police refrain from proactive policing, black lives are lost. Lost because of a myth. The best research and data reach this conclusion. There is no evidence that police are killing blacks just because they're black. You now have the truth. Does it matter? I'm Heather McDonald of the Manhattan Institute for Prager University.
What are the 5 biggest issues facing blacks in America? Here's my list. Problem number 5, the victim mentality. Nothing holds someone back more than seeing himself as a victim. Why? Because a victim is not responsible for his situation. Everything is someone else's fault. And the victim sees little chance of improving his life. How can he get ahead if someone is holding him back? All this makes the victim unhappy, frustrated, and angry. This is how too many blacks see themselves, as victims. So much so that their victim status becomes their primary identity and their ruling ideology. I call it victimology. Unfortunately, many black churches preach this victimology. Many black parents pass it on to their children, inner city schools teach it to their students, and the black media reinforce it. Meanwhile, the NAACP and other black grievance groups fundraise on it. Problem number 4, lack of diversity. Blacks repeatedly demand an honest dialogue or debate about race. But how can there ever be an honest dialogue about race between blacks and whites when there is virtually no honest dialogue between blacks and blacks? It's hypocritical. And if a black doesn't think whites are ultimately responsible for black people's problems, they're labeled a sellout, Uncle Tom, or race traitor. As long as this type of groupthink exists, race reverence of the Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson type will continue to be celebrated, while independent black thinkers such as Professors Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams will be shunned. The honest race dialogue and debate that first has to happen is not between blacks and whites, but between blacks and blacks. We demand diversity from others, but need to practice it ourselves where it really matters, in thought, opinion, and even political affiliation. Problem number 3, urban terrorism. As just about everyone knows, but too few talk about publicly, in majority black cities, violent black-on-black crime is rampant. A Department of Justice study from 1980 through 2008 revealed that blacks accounted for almost half of the nation's homicide victims, 47.4%, and more than half of the offenders, 52.4%, all while being 13% of America's population. The Tuskegee Institute conducted a study of all known lynchings of blacks that occurred between 1882 through 1968. During this 86-year span, which is essentially the post-Civil War era up to the Civil Rights era, 3,446 blacks were reportedly lynched. Presently, black-on-black murder eclipses the number of blacks lynched over the course of 80 years, roughly every 6 months. Unbelievably, the culpability for this disproportionate amount of mayhem actually lies with a menacing 2 to 3% minority within the black populace. I call them urban terrorists. And since they're literally spawned from problem number 2, the black community protects them. Problem number 2, proliferation of baby mamas. The disintegration of the nuclear family has led to an astronomical increase of single mother households. According to the Moynihan Report, in 1965, nearly 25% of black children were born to unwed mothers. The report's author, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, said this was a disaster in the making. He was, of course, vilified by so-called black leaders and their progressive allies. But he was right. Today, the out-of-wedlock birth rate is nearly 75%, and even higher in some urban areas. To be clear, baby daddies share this responsibility with baby mamas. Yet, while baby daddies are blamed and rarely shown compassion, baby mamas are rarely blamed and receive both compassion and support. This lopsided dynamic and the previously listed pathologies stem directly from the number one problem facing the Black community. Problem number one, unquestioning allegiance to so-called progressive policies. Unwavering loyalty to progressive liberal policies is the primary reason these dire conditions persist. It both makes them possible and perpetuates them. It's no coincidence that progressivism is the common thread that binds predominantly Black cities where single-parent homes, failing schools, rampant poverty, and crime predominate. Look at cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. They've been run by progressive Democrats for decades. If their liberal policies were at all effective, these cities should have become models of economic growth and prosperity. Instead, they're models of dysfunction. By fostering and exploiting the victim mentality, discouraging self-examination, subsidizing baby mamas, and making excuses for Black thugs, so-called progressive policies don't alleviate the problems that afflict the Black community, they aggravate those problems. You may have noticed that racism did not make the list. Why not? It's simple. There will be no solution to the problems afflicting Black America until more Blacks recognize that the issues plaguing our community are ultimately self-inflicted. Does racism exist? Sure, but there are other problems far more serious. And waiting until there are no more races will mean waiting and making excuses forever. I'm Talib Starks for Prager University.
It's a perfectly good time to raise the question when you look at what's happening in our country. Baltimore being an example today.
You mind? Yes. What's happening today, I think, is as a result of the technology. It's not just happening. We're just seeing it.
The point is, it's been happening.
Been happening. A cop can say...
Communities and police.
Yeah.
Seeing color.
If you take the police out of the neighborhood, if the police live in some enclave...
Let's say the suburbs.
Yeah. And they come into
the inner city.
The inner city as the law. They don't really know who they are lawing for. They're law to.
They forget the community they're supposed to be serving.
Precisely, yeah. So that's one of the things that I
perhaps don't understand the community.
No, they can't possibly understand the community. They don't know the people that live in the community. They don't know them. They don't know anything about it. It's just like, okay, you people are drug dealers and welfare queens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's hard to get a break in a situation like that.
So what do we do? Change the police?
Let's hire the police in that neighborhood, and you have to stay in that neighborhood. You have to know the people you're supposed to be serving and protecting. But that's what all of the cars say, to serve and protect. All of the cars that on the to serve and
that's
protect.
Right, that's it.
But that really isn't what happens at all in these communities. But now, the police in shootings, particularly in shootings, their one defense is, I feared for my safety.
It's hard to think you fear for your safety when somebody's running away from you and their back is to you.
But it doesn't hold up when someone sees it,
So what's changed is video.
Oh, I don't have mine. That little cell phone that everybody carries.
You mean something like this?
That has changed it all. So I think what will happen now is that there will be some reorganization in terms of policing. Because there's no real part of the country, I think, that is sacrosanct in terms of that. Although I do give my state a lot of credit because
we're going to talk about your state.
Yeah,
you give them a lot of credit.
Yeah, in the police department, all the state troopers that I run
that you
into
come into contact with.
are gentlemen. Sirs.
Is that because you are a man of
I don't
such
think so.
dignity, integrity?
I don't think so. I think that's the way they're trained. I think that's...
This is today's headline from the Wall Street Journal. Obama says Baltimore riot part of slow rolling crisis. It has reached a crisis level, hasn't it?
It's a crisis because we see it.
Yeah. Well, so there.
Yeah.
Let's assume that seeing it brought the reality to our consciousness. Then seeing it is a good thing, because without having the reality in our consciousness, we will not deal to it.
Yeah, we would not feel
And
so...
haven't.
No.
Yeah. But at
And
the
one
same
of the
time,
things-
you have to say at the same time, and you would say it as strong as anyone, it's no excuse for them bombing and destroying your own neighborhood.
That is-
And burning down wherever it's happening.
The hardest
Burning down storefronts
part
and
to
stores that
understand
people...
with mobs is how they get turned into that.
Yeah.
What's to be gained? You know, if you stop for one split second to think, burning and looting doesn't help you in any way. It makes
Yeah. And in Baltimore's case, you know, the police chief is black, the mayor's black, mayor's a woman.
yeah, big deal.
Well,
She doesn't have control of the police.
Good evening, everybody. I know we've been on a long flight, but given the extraordinary interest in the shootings that took place in Louisiana and Minnesota, I thought it'd be important for me to address all of you directly. And I want to begin by expressing my condolences for the families of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. As I said in the statement that I posted on Facebook, we have seen tragedies like this too many times. The Justice Department, I know, has opened a civil rights investigation in Baton Rouge. The governor of Minnesota, I understand, is calling for an investigation there as well. As is my practice, given my institutional role, I can't comment on the specific facts of these cases. And I have full confidence in the Justice Department's ability to conduct a thorough and fair inquiry. But what I can say is that all of us as Americans should be troubled by these shootings, because these are not isolated incidents. They're symptomatic of a broader set of racial disparities that exist in our criminal justice system. And I just want to give people a few statistics to try to put in context why emotions are so raw around these issues. According to various studies, not just one, but a wide range of studies that have been carried out over a number of years, African Americans are 30% more likely than whites to be pulled over. After being pulled over, African Americans and Hispanics are 3 times more likely to be searched. Last year, African Americans were shot by police at more than twice the rate of whites. African Americans are arrested at twice the rate of whites. African American defendants are 75% more likely to be charged with offenses carrying mandatory minimums. They receive sentences that are almost 10% longer than comparable whites arrested for the same crime. So that if you add it all up, the African American and Hispanic population, who make up only 30% of the general population, make up more than half of the incarcerated population. Now, these are facts. And when incidents like this occur, there's a big chunk of our fellow citizenry that feels as if, because of the color of their skin, they are not being treated the same. And that hurts. And that should trouble all of us. This is not just a black issue. It's not just a Hispanic issue. This is an American issue that we should all care about. All fair-minded people should be concerned. Now, let me just say, we have extraordinary appreciation and respect for the vast majority of police officers who put their lives on the line to protect us every single day. They've got a dangerous job. It is a tough job. And as I've said before, they have a right to go home to their families, just like anybody else on the job. And there are going to be circumstances in which they've got to make split-second decisions. We understand that. But when we see data that indicates disparities in how African Americans and Latinos may be treated in various jurisdictions around the country, then it's incumbent on all of us to say we can do better than this. We are better than this. And to not have it degenerate into the usual political scrum, we should be able to step back, reflect, and ask ourselves, what can we do better so that everybody feels as if they're equal under the law? Now, the good news is that there are practices we can institute that will make a difference. Last year, we put together a task force that was comprised of civil rights activists and community leaders, but also law enforcement officials, police captains, sheriffs. And they sat around a table, and they looked at the data, and they looked at best practices. And they came up with specific recommendations and steps that could ensure that the trust between communities and police departments were rebuilt, and incidents like this would be less likely to occur. And there's some jurisdictions out there that have adopted these recommendations, but there are a whole bunch that have not. And if anything good comes out of these tragedies, my hope is that communities around the country take a look and say, how can we implement these recommendations? And that the overwhelming majority of police officers who are doing a great job every single day and are doing their job without regard to race, that they encourage their leadership and organizations that represent them to get behind these recommendations. Because ultimately, if you can rebuild trust between communities and the police departments that serve them, that helps us solve crime problems.
Imagine being blackballed, blackmailed as a black male, taken from under a black sky on a black night on a black ship, Went from being an African warrior to just another black guy. Ironic, cause back then the black guy wasn't invited to a black tie. I had to work on the field and cook black pudding pie, and if I didn't back down, I was beating black and blue until I blacked out. How can a white man have such a black heart? But like a blacksmith, I forged my own path. Rather than sit at the back of the bus, I'd rather be blacklisted in the blackness, marching with a black fist till I gained my rights. And I just sat on the corner and smoked till I had black lips. Either that or I'll be blacked out on a black background with a black mask and a black strap, waiting to run up in someone's house like black, black. It's kinda funny like Jack Black, how I changed my cards blackjack till I could afford to order a black cab. We built our own black businesses, black sports, black arts. Used to call me a black sheep, but now I have a black car, a Blackberry and a black Jeep. And I heard it's even cool to be black now, and Obama turned the white into a black house. And if you don't get that, you ain't black spiritually. Look how many times I use black lyrically, and that's what I call a black history.
That's what I call a black history.
Hi, I'm Bob Reamer with the Mayor Harold Washington Legacy Committee. I'm here to ask you, what would Harold Washington say today? Well, on October 5th, we are commemorating the historic October 5 Come Alive registration drive that propelled Harold Washington into the mayor's office as Chicago's first black mayor. He made lasting changes. But today, like 34 years ago, people of color, other progressives, and our youth are again alienated from the established political system. They want change. So what would Harold say? He would say that the power to change is the power to vote. He was dedicated his whole career to people's right to vote. So join us this October 5 to remember Harold Washington's struggle and his successes as we honor him and the struggles here and across the country and the battles against voter suppression. We will be at the Apostolic Church of God at 6320 South Dorchester from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. If you want more information, call 773-643-4828 or email us at jehill@rcn.com. So what would Harold say? He'd say, come out and vote on November 8th.